In the endless, featureless hangar spaces, where constant cold rains and the air is filled with a persistent smell of machine oil and dust, lies an extraordinary story. It is a story not connected to great wars or epic-making reigns, but rather to a quiet, almost unnoticed page recorded in paper documents and reports. In the very heart of America, in Oklahoma City, there is an archive that contains this silent chronicle. It is here, in these storage rooms, that millions of pages are carefully stacked. Reports on every flight, every inspection, every minor malfunction that could occur in the course of aircraft operations. This is a world of statistical precision, predictability, and order. In this world, every anomaly must have a clear and logical explanation, documented in relevant instructions and manuals. The probability that something truly inexplicable exists in this vast ocean of data is practically zero. The system is designed for classification, analysis, and case closure. It does not tolerate uncertainty or open-ended conclusions. Everything must have a definite ending, a clear explanation. Yet despite this strict order, among numerous reports about bird strikes, mechanical failures, and other incidents, there is one special document. It is not marked top secret, nor hidden in a secret safe or sealed folder. It lies quietly in an ordinary cardboard box, accessible to anyone who knows what to look for. The case number is AC 1786. To access this unique file, one must navigate a labyrinth of bureaucratic procedures. First, submit a request, fill out numerous forms, wait weeks, and sometimes months. The archivist, accustomed to requests from insurance companies or aviation researchers, will indifferently and with restrained apathy deliver a cart loaded with dusty boxes bearing many labels and inscriptions. And it is precisely in one of these boxes, among hundreds of similar ones, that the very document is found, with a faded cover, yellowed paper, covered with dry technical data, tables, diagrams, and a description of the aircraft type. In this folder are the flight number, route, weather conditions. Everything is standard and familiar, but as soon as you open it and begin reading the attached transcript of the crew's radio communications with the control tower, a cold chill begins to crawl slowly down your body. At first, dry, professional language of pilots and controllers, then a sudden change in tone. Confusion, anxiety appear in their words, and at the end, an obvious and poorly concealed horror. The words recorded on the page do not match the figures and diagrams around them. They describe an event that, according to the laws of physics and aviation rules, simply could not have happened. This is an account of an incident that violates not only technical standards, but also the laws of nature. Before delving into the essence of this case, I would like to ask for a small favor. Your attention and interest are the best contribution. Understanding this case is important because it is an anomaly in the system, a malfunction in a very complex matrix. This document does not provide definitive answers. It raises one main question: what was the cargo Boeing 747 pursuing when it found itself in the icy darkness of the polar night on November 22, 1986? And why did the entire truth about what happened turn out to be so dangerous that it had to be buried alive under layers of bureaucratic lies and secrecy? Today, we will attempt to conduct our own investigation into this matter. We will open the archive, step by step, analyze every line, every radar mark, every technical description. We want to understand what really happened, because the authorities have never dared to see the case through to the end. To fully grasp the scale and mystery of what occurred, it is important to first imagine the scene, where even today, half a century after its first flight, this legendary aircraft continues to evoke awe and admiration. Its story is not just a tale of engineering marvel, it is a true testament to the American dream, embodied in metal and wings, as well as an example of the genius and perseverance of the engineers who created it. In the mid-1960s, the airline Pan American, then considered a flagship of global civil aviation, approached the well-known American company Boeing with a very bold and daring request. They needed an aircraft twice as large as all existing planes at the time and capable of making intercontinental flights more accessible to the middle class. Many specialists and experts believed such a task was nearly impossible. However, a team of engineers led by the legendary Joe Sutter did not shy away from the challenge. They set out to create a unique aircraft that would become the largest in the world. To do this, they built in Washington State the largest factory in the history of the aviation industry at that time, to have the capacity to design a truly giant flying machine. As a result, the famous Boeing 747 was born. Its design included four powerful Pratt & Whitney JT9D engines, each comparable in size and power to a small car. The fuselage featured a distinctive hump, the cockpit and first-class lounge, which became symbols of luxury and comfort. The wingspan of this giant reached 60 meters, and its weight exceeded 300,000 tons. It was not just an airplane, but a true flying marvel of engineering, an achievement that revolutionized the perception of aviation capabilities. The aircraft, with tail number 8H113, operating flight number 116-688, was a cargo modification of this unique aircraft. Part 3 of 12. Boeing 747 was a true workhorse, lacking passenger glamour but possessing even greater power, endurance, and payload capacity. Its massive nose cone could lift upward, revealing a huge cargo hold capable of accommodating over 100 tons of freight. That day, its hold was filled with thousands of boxes of young Bojo French wine, which in the 1980s enjoyed immense popularity worldwide. During those years, there was a real boom in this wine, and every year on the third Thursday of November, a global race began to deliver the fresh harvest to store shelves around the world, from New York to Tokyo. Therefore, Flight 116-688 was not just a cargo flight, it was part of this collective excitement, rushing to deliver a valuable and very fragile cargo. The cockpit of this aircraft, built in 1986, represented a unique blend of two eras. On one hand, it preserved the legacy of the 60s, numerous analog dials, toggles, and switches. On the other hand, the first cathode ray displays had already begun to appear, heralding the future glass cockpit. Only the most skilled and well-trained pilots could operate such a large and complex machine. One of them was Captain Kenji Terauti. He was 47 years old, and the sky was his life and destiny. He was not just a driver of this airliner, he was a professional with extensive experience. His career began in the Japan Self-Defense Forces, where he piloted F-86 Sabre and F-104 Starfighter fighters. These aircraft demanded absolute precision from the pilot, lightning-fast reactions, and impeccable eyesight, as mistakes could be costly. He was accustomed to extreme speeds, high G-forces, and unconventional situations. After finishing his service in the Air Force, he transitioned to civil aviation and became one of the most respected captains at Japan Airlines. His flight hours exceeded 10,000. Sitting beside him in the right seat was the second pilot, Takanori Tamafutsu. This young man, slightly younger than his captain, had already established himself as an experienced and confident professional. He had over 7,000 flight hours under his belt, demonstrating his professionalism and high level of training. He was no rookie, not among those pilots prone to panic or mistakes due to inexperience. His hands were steady, and his eyes carried a calmness that only comes after many years of working in the sky. Behind the instrument panel, slightly further back, sat the flight engineer, a company veteran, a man with extensive experience and an impeccable reputation. He sat with his back to the crew, carefully monitoring hundreds of systems of the giant liner. His flight hours approached 15,000, and he had faced numerous situations requiring full concentration and expertise. He was a person you could fully trust, as his experience and professionalism made him a true guardian of the safety of this aircraft. All three pilots, the captain, the co-pilot, and the flight engineer, were true masters of their craft, professionals of the highest caliber. Their combined flight hours and extensive experience in the sky totaled nearly 30,000 hours of flight testing. This crew had turned their work into an automatic routine, something they approached with complete confidence. Every action, every word and command strictly adhered to the protocols and standards developed over years of service. It was precisely this impeccable approach that made their reputation and professional integrity the foundation of passenger and crew safety. It was this high level of skill and reputation that later became the main reason no one would believe in a possible mistake or hallucination, even if something suddenly seemed wrong. Their route took them through one of the most severe and sparsely populated corridors on the planet, the so-called transpolar route. During the Cold War era, this path was not just a short route from Europe to Asia. It held strategic importance. It allowed bypassing Soviet territory, making it highly sought after. However, saving time and fuel came at a high cost. This road, which pilots called the ghostly route, was shrouded in a special atmosphere. Over vast stretches of the journey, crossing the icy deserts of Greenland, Canada, and Alaska, pilots felt complete solitude, where radio communication could only operate over short distances and only within line of sight. Contact with the outside world was virtually impossible. In such conditions, they had to rely on shortwave communication, capricious and unreliable, yet capable of penetrating millions of kilometers through reflections from the ionosphere. This was a special kind of navigation, turning into an art. When the flight approached the magnetic North Pole, ordinary compasses went haywire, showing incorrect directions. In such moments, pilots had to trust inertial navigation systems, complex gyroscopic devices that track the aircraft's course from the departure point. However, these systems tended to accumulate errors over time, making navigation especially challenging. Under these conditions, every pilot flying this route had to be prepared for complete autonomy, knowing that help in an emergency would simply be impossible to reach. It was a world where the only interlocutors were voices crackling through the radio waves and the silent indicators of instruments. A world where space seemed endless and oppressive, and the polar night stretched on for months. It was in such icy, silent airspace over Alaska, on that harsh and cold evening, that Flight 168 entered one of the most distant and dangerous routes. It happened in the evening of the 17th. They appeared as if out of nowhere, like uninvited guests, roughly 600 meters below and slightly ahead of the civilian airliner. At that moment, when everything seemed to be proceeding normally, these objects did not approach the aircraft, did not attempt to impose their will, did not make contact, and did not turn on their identification lights. They simply continued moving on a parallel course, like invisible shadows, silently and calmly. For the pilot caught in this situation, the first thought that naturally came to mind was that these were most likely military aircraft. Such objects are not uncommon in this area, and they can appear suddenly, provoking curiosity and caution. However, within a few moments, something in their behavior began to raise suspicion. These figures made no attempt to communicate via radio, nor did they perform maneuvers typical of intercepting or identifying aircraft. They did not turn on their lights, did not signal their presence, and simply hung motionless nearby, like two invisible observers or sentinels watching the surroundings. Over the next 7 minutes, silence reigned in the Boeing cockpit. The only sounds were the hum of the engines and the faint clicking of instruments, as if the machinery itself was trying to understand what was happening. The crew, including the captain, the co-pilot, and the flight engineer, all silently watched these strange lights, trying to find a rational explanation for their appearance. Perhaps they were the lights of another civilian aircraft flying lower along the same course. But then the question arises, why didn't the controller see this object? Could it have been a new type of military drone? But why would they fly so close to a civilian plane? These thoughts flickered through everyone's mind at the controls. Then Captain Tarauti decided that it was necessary to contact the Anchorage control tower. The time was approximately 17:18 local time. At that moment, the phrase that officially marked the beginning of what was happening was spoken, a signal that everything was starting to take clearer shape. In response to the crew's request, the controller said, "Koi Center, this is YAL 168. Request traffic information." At that moment, as Captain later noted, his voice sounded calm, even with a slight irony, because he was hoping to hear a simple explanation. But the reply from the ground sounded like a verdict that shattered any hope for a straightforward explanation. The transmission said, "YAL 168, your area is clear. Repeating, no traffic." This response became a real alarm signal. If the controller was not tracking any other aircraft or objects, then these strange lights and figures lacked active transponders, which are usually used by aircraft for identification. And this meant that the situation was shifting from strange to potentially dangerous. And then, as if on command, these objects began to act actively. Part 6 of 12. The two fires that had previously hovered to the left and slightly below, suddenly with astonishing speed, reoriented themselves and appeared directly in front of the aircraft at a distance of no more than 1 kilometer. Their movement was instantaneous, without visible acceleration, loud sounds, or turbulent trails. They seemed to vanish from one point in space and immediately reappear elsewhere, instantly changing their position. Now the crew could observe them in greater detail. These objects no longer appeared merely as lights. They resembled two identical flying machines. In his subsequent testimony, Captain Tarauti would provide a detailed diagram of their structure. They looked like flattened cylinders or squares with softly rounded corners. According to his estimates, the sizes of these devices were relatively small, comparable to the fuselage of a small business jet. At the center of each was a row of rectangular nozzles or openings, emitting pulsating light similar to Christmas string lights, flickering and changing in intensity. Along the edges of these objects, there were flames. Any aircraft, whether a plane, helicopter, or missile, operates according to laws governing movement in the air, laws of inertia and aerodynamics. To change its direction or speed, one must overcome air resistance and account for the mass of the vehicle itself. Imagine an F-15 fighter jet, one of the most famous and proud aircraft of the United States Air Force. This plane is based at a nearby airbase, and its weight is about 20 tons. To perform a sharp turn, especially at supersonic speeds, requires a spacious area, at least several dozen square kilometers. Under such conditions, the pilot experiences intense G-forces, 8 and sometimes 9 times the normal Earth gravity. This means his body is operating at the limit of its capabilities, and the aircraft's structure is literally on the verge of destruction. In such conditions, any abnormal object or movement seems impossible. Everything appears strictly governed by the laws of physics. But these laws, seemingly immutable and unchangeable, appeared completely ignored by the crew of flight number 668. They observed objects behaving as if the laws of physics did not exist for them at all. These mysterious figures performed maneuvers inaccessible to modern technology. They turned at right angles, stopped instantly from hundreds of kilometers per hour, and then resumed movement just as quickly. If a person had been inside such a craft, they would have been crushed against the walls. And if they had been inside a craft made from known materials, they would have been torn to shreds by the incredible G-forces. For Captain Tarauti, a former fighter pilot, all of this was a real shock. He had not just seen an unidentified object. He had encountered a technology that seemed to mock all his knowledge of flight and physics. After all this, at 17 hours, 23 minutes, 5 minutes after that impossible aerial ballet, Captain Tarauti re-established contact with the ARN Corridor Command Post. His voice carried not irony, but anxiety and tension. He reported, "Anchorage, we have two objects directly on our course. They are maneuvering very quickly. Please check the military radars." At the Flight Control Center in Anchorage, where dispatcher Deloyd, who had replaced Carl Henke, was on duty, he suddenly felt a chill run down his spine. He had worked here for many years and had seen all sorts of malfunctions, from hydraulic failures to icing and severe turbulence. But he had never encountered anything like this. He repeatedly stared at the green glow of his display, and on the screen was only one dot, the designation of Flight 668, stubbornly following its assigned trajectory. Then he contacted the regional U.S. Air Force Operations Center, located at Elmendorf Air Force Base, the main node of the NORAD system in Alaska. If anyone had seen something in the sky, it was them. The response came almost instantly and became the first objective confirmation of the Japanese crew's words. The contact in question was called primary, meaning it was the first recorded signal. In the military system, a powerful radar doesn't just think it sees a target, it actually receives a reflected signal. This meant there was a solid physical object near the aircraft, an object without a transponder, that is, without a device that could identify it. And this object clearly should not have been in this location. At that moment, the entire story ceased to be just a pilot's account. It became a documented fact, supported by military sources. But what happened next was beyond any explanation. Two objects hovering in front of the nose of the aircraft suddenly flared with a bright, blinding light. Subsequently, the sky was filled with a vivid light that seemed to spread across the entire space. filling it with warmth and a gentle glow. Inside the cockpit, the instrument panel shone especially brightly, as if obeying some internal magic, and the pilot felt a warmth on his face, reminiscent of a fireplace on a winter night, when outside the window a cold blizzard rages. This sensation was no coincidence. The source of this light was directly in front of him, and only after focusing and looking more carefully did he realize where this astonishing glow was coming from. Two small devices appeared before his eyes, which had been accompanying the aircraft and seemed insignificant before. They were merely lookout tools, advanced observation devices, but their true role was far from simple. From the depths of polar darkness, from the bottomless, black abyss of the northern sky, the silhouette of something very large and mysterious slowly and silently emerged. This silhouette looked as if it had been woven from night itself, from the darkest and most silent part of the cosmos. It gradually became more visible, as if slowly stretching out from the abyss, creating the impression that something incomparably more majestic and ancient was hidden inside this enormous object than one could have imagined. Captain Tarauti's professional composure, a man who had flown over 10,000 hours in his career, attended military pilot training, and was accustomed to the most extreme situations, vanished in an instant. His inner voice, used to calmness and precision, suddenly broke, and he let out a scream. On the communication recordings, his usually calm and restrained voice can be heard breaking into a panic-stricken cry. He tries to describe what he sees before him, but his words rush ahead of what is happening, and he struggles to find the right expressions. Before him appeared a gigantic object, and he attempted to describe its shape. He compared it to a walnut because that was the closest analogy he could think of. The object was completely dark, matte, with no visible light source. Yet its contours were so clear that they seemed to be drawn against the starry sky. It obscured part of the sky, and therefore its outlines were distinctly visible despite the lack of illumination. The size of this mysterious body was truly incredible. According to Captain Tarauti, it was at least twice the size of an aircraft carrier. To give an example, the length of a modern Nimitz-class nuclear aircraft carrier exceeds 330 meters, and the height from the waterline to the top of the mast reaches about 75 meters, a floating city. But the new object observed by the Yalmanis 168 crew was estimated to have a diameter of between 600 and 900 meters. It was so enormous that even the largest passenger airplane in the world, a Boeing 747, would seem like just a dragonfly next to an eagle in comparison. Two small reconnaissance ships carrying out their mission approached this monster and apparently entered inside or docked with it. Their lights went out, and now Yalmanis 168 was left alone with this endless, silent, infinitely large shadowy silhouette. On Earth, controllers listened carefully to what was happening. At first, they thought the pilot had completely lost his mind under stress, but suddenly their screens lit up with new signals. Near the point where Yalmanis 168 was physically located, another blurred but clearly visible glow appeared. This glow was enormous and hazy, but its existence was confirmed by military specialists from the command base in Elmdorf. They recorded a powerful primary contact that followed the aircraft's side. The size of this contact was such that second pilot Tamfudzi and flight engineer Tsukuba, who initially viewed the captain's observations with skepticism, were now forced to acknowledge the truth after seeing it with their own eyes. They stood by the cockpit windows, observing what was directly in front of them. The object in question was so close that they could discern some details on its surface. These details resembled protrusions or panels, although due to the darkness and limited visibility, they could not provide an exact description. They were struck by how enormous this object was. When their Boeing aircraft approached the Firmins area and the horizon was illuminated by the lights of a large city, the sky on the horizon suddenly brightened with city lights, and the object simply disappeared. It was as if it dissolved into the air just as suddenly as it had appeared, vanished without a trace. On the radar screens of air traffic controllers and military personnel, the marker of this mysterious object disappeared in an instant. Captain Tarauti, with a trembling voice, reported that the sky was clear and no dangerous objects were visible on the horizon. It was approximately 6:23 p.m. when Flight 168, which had already consumed a little over a ton of fuel during its flight through difficult and sometimes dangerous maneuvers, finally landed at Anchorage Airport. The crew looked pale, silent, and clearly shaken by what had happened. They were alive, But their ordeal was only beginning. As soon as the aircraft touched the ground, investigators from the Federal Aviation Administration and representatives of the Air Force boarded the plane. The crew's interrogation lasted several hours. Once Captain Tarowdy had calmed down and regained his composure, he began to describe in detail and systematically what he had seen and what was happening at that moment. He even provided sketches illustrating the shape and contours of the object. The investigators listened to him with impassive faces, showing no hint of surprise or doubt. And almost immediately, the course of the investigation began to take on a different character. Instead of seeking the truth and explaining what had happened, the case started to shift toward discrediting the witnesses. The crew was tested for alcohol and drugs. They were thoroughly examined by psychologists, and all tests confirmed their complete sanity and sobriety. Then the investigation moved in another direction. The first official hypothesis emerged that could explain what was seen. According to this version, the pilots supposedly observed the light of the planet Venus or Jupiter. This hypothesis seemed logical because a bright planet could indeed appear as an unusual light and even seem like a moving object. However, shortly thereafter, astronomer experts refuted it. They confirmed that there were no bright planets in that sector of the sky at that time. Moreover, no planet is capable of maneuvering in such a way as to create false radar echoes. Therefore, this version was deemed invalid. The next hypothesis that emerged explained the phenomenon as atmospheric in nature. It was suggested that a temperature inversion, a rare and unusual meteorological condition, caused a warm layer of air to sit above a cold one. In such cases, light and objects in the sky can become distorted, creating illusions and false reflections. However, this explanation also did not hold up under scrutiny. Weather probes installed in the area did not detect any temperature inversions. Radar stations could not record distortions caused by such effects, as the false signals showed no meaningful or controllable maneuvers. Eventually, the most official and final version was proposed, which was included in the concluding investigation report. This hypothesis suggested that suspended ice crystals were present in the air. According to it, these crystals, reflecting moonlight and ground-based lights, created an optical illusion, making it appear as though there was an object in the sky. The radar detected a reflection resembling an object. When all the collected facts were organized and analyzed, researchers and specialists gained a complete picture of the incident. Every detail, every small element contributed to a unified understanding, confirming Captain Tarowdy's words. This individual, demonstrating courage and resilience, prepared a detailed report for his superiors to convey the full truth about what had happened. Later, during a special presentation at the headquarters of the Federal Aviation Administration in Washington, he systematically laid out all available evidence. The room was filled with dead silence. No one present could find the words to express their thoughts. The story seemed incredible and almost fantastical, but all materials and testimonies were carefully documented and verified. A few days later, according to Callahan himself, he received a phone call from individuals claiming to be from the scientific intelligence team of President Reagan and agents of the CIA. They arranged a meeting at one of the Federal Aviation Administration's technological centers. There, in front of experts and specialists, Callahan once again presented all collected materials and evidence supporting his claims. After his report, one of the attendees, dressed in a strict suit and with a serious expression, stood up and declared, "This incident never took place. We have never met nor made any statements regarding it. We are confiscating all materials and documents related to this case." Immediately afterward, Callahan and his team were offered to sign a non-disclosure agreement. They were strictly ordered to forget about what happened, leave it in the past, and not discuss it under any circumstances. The only thing Callahan managed to preserve was to hide the original report and a copy of the audio recording in his office as proof. All other materials were confiscated, classified, and forever kept from the public. Why were such measures taken? Why did high-level agencies show such extraordinary interest in what appeared to be a routine case of observing an unidentified flying object? The answer lay in the very essence of the geopolitical situation. This occurred in 1986, during the height of the Cold War, when each country sought to strengthen its defenses and control the global situation. Alaska at that time was considered America's shield against the Soviet Union. It was here that the radars of the North American Aerospace Defense Command were located, designed for the timely detection of any Soviet nuclear attack. And it was precisely in this protected airspace, guarded by the most advanced means, that for half an hour an unidentified object of enormous size flew unimpeded. It demonstrated technologies that far exceeded everything known to American or Soviet scientists and military personnel. These technologies seemed unprecedented, beyond the reach of modern equipment and knowledge. Acknowledging this fact would mean admitting the vulnerability of the entire defense system, which could trigger widespread panic and destabilize the situation. Therefore, a decision was made to conceal the incident at all costs. A scapegoat was needed, someone who would become the symbol of a non-existent incident and allow the authorities to save face. This person was Captain Kenju Terauchi. Despite his impeccable reputation and high professionalism, he was removed from flight duty and reassigned to office work as someone who could be easily accused and disposed of. He became a victim of a system that decided to cover up the matter at any cost. But despite pressure and threats, Terauchi never recanted his testimony. He continued to insist that he saw what he saw and that he had evidence. Until his death in 2009, he persistently maintained, "I know what I saw, and they have proof." The incident involving Flight GL-168 is not just a case of observing unidentified objects in the sky. It is a documented case in which the testimonies of highly qualified specialists and witnesses were. The official explanation states that the incident was caused by ice crystals forming in the air. However, if one looks a little deeper and accesses the archives still kept in secret vaults, a completely different picture emerges. There are old films with radar images, capturing something else entirely. These recordings show that the giant Boeing 747 appears as a small, toy-like model with a huge shadow following behind, comparable in size to a large aircraft carrier. As long as these archives remain closed and inaccessible to the general public, the mystery of the enigmatic flight number 168 continues to remain unsolved. This case reminds us that even in an era when technology allows us to control almost everything, there is still something beyond our understanding. What lies behind the dry lines of the official report? What secrets are hidden in the details? Perhaps it was a meteorological anomaly that occurred at that time, or a deliberate concealment of facts that could have changed the course of history. These questions remain open, and everyone is free to share their version of events. Some suggest it involved unusual weather phenomena, while others believe it might have been an attempt to hide something more significant and dangerous. In the comments, people can share their own guesses and theories. Many thanks to everyone who watched this story until the end. Your support and attention are very valuable to us. Every opinion helps us understand how interesting this topic is. Remember the importance of carefully studying such mysteries.